Rain came down in a sheet that night, the kind that made streetlights look like smeared coins. Michael Ward walked a little faster, hood up, Emily's small hand secure in his. Her breath puffed out in front of them, a pale circle in the wet darkness. She was 8 and fearless in ways that kept him brave and ashamed at the same time. "Dad," she said, close to his ear, the words barely more than a breath mashed into rain and the scrape of the city's gutters. "Dad, don't let me die." The whisper split the ordinary between them. It wasn't a dramatic plea. It was small, clear, absolute, the kind of thing a child says and then trusts the world will understand. But the sound landed like a bell inside Michael, a vow sharpened into danger, a memory of a promise he'd made in softer weather, a weight he carried the way other men carried wallets or keys. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Never," he said. Soft, certain. They cut through an alley to shave time off the walk home, the shortcut he took as often as he could to avoid the longer, brighter streets. The alley was a trough of shadow between two buildings. The rain turned it into a river of small silver flashes. Ahead, a woman was backed against a brick wall, hair plastered to her face, phone clutched like a talisman. Two men moved around her like wolves moving a corner. One of them stepped too close. The woman let out a sound, not quite a scream, a rustle of fear. Michael's feet slowed. He made a small calculation that took a half-second and a lifetime. Emily's hand tugged. "Dad?" she asked, and the whisper returned, as fragile and unshakable. "Dad, don't let me die." The broken pen sat in his palm. He always carried it. It had been Sarah's, a small, scratched metal pen with an eagle etched near the clip. A souvenir of other life, of a promise. When it was whole, it had been a present on the day they found out Emily was coming. It had been bent out of shape at some point, a conspicuous fracture near the middle. He had welded the two halves together with tape and stubbornness. The eagle was still visible, a tiny, quiet thing. He had tucked it into his jacket that morning without thinking, the same way he carried a lifetime of training in fingers and bone memory. He stepped forward. His movements were measured. He didn't shout. He didn't draw attention. He crossed the alley in 3 strides. Close enough to smell the wet leather of one attacker's jacket. Close enough to see the tilt of the other's jaw. Close enough to know what would happen if he did nothing. 2 fast, efficient strikes. None of the grand flourishes he'd been capable of in other years. There was no need, and there would be no glory. He used the pen as an anchor for a wrist. He shoved, pivoted, wrapped himself around the threat with the same precision he had used to keep people alive on assignments he had long ago chosen to leave behind. The men went down with the kind of legal force the body remembers: leverage, angles, the economy of pain. Emily's small figure stayed at his shoulder. She watched, eyes wide, palms flat against his coat as if to steady him and herself. The rescued woman sobbed and gathered her knees, phone forgotten in wet grass. Someone in the shadows had pulled out a phone. Light pulsed. A short clip began to be recorded. When it was over, Michael stood in the alley breathing like a man who'd been running up a long flight of stairs. He checked Emily. She was intact. She looked at him with an expression that put the rest of the night into only 2 words: relief and trust. "Are you okay, baby?" he asked. She nodded. "You're my dad." He felt the tiny fracture in the pen under his fingertips, the eagle catching the weak overhead light like an accusation and a comfort at once. He wiped rain from his face. He spoke to the woman quickly, instructed her to call the police, to find shelter from the rain, told her to stay put until officers arrived. He gave no interviews. He left before cameras could swarm. By morning, the clip was everywhere. The internet made its judgments before their coffee had cooled. Clips looped and comments stacked like concrete. Some viewers laughed at the man seen as a blue-collar figure, A janitor, someone wrote, hero for 15 seconds, and then an object of ridicule for the way his jacket hung or the way he reacted on camera. Others smirked at the old-fashioned pen and called it a prop. A few called it vigilante theater. Michael watched the comments with a heaviness he hadn't expected. His phone vibrated until he silenced it. A neighbor texted a link with an exclamation point. Someone from work, a morning shift colleague, sent a thumbs-up emoji that felt like a spear to his chest. The piece that made his stomach drop was a clip trimmed to look like spectacle. The one that left out the woman's fear, cut the parts where he told her to call the police, spliced in a commentator's sneer. That version trended. He thought about the whisper again. He thought about Sarah. There was a memory that arrived in fragments. Her at a kitchen counter, the light through the blinds drawing lines on her face, her hand on his arm. "Protect them," she'd said once, without drama but with authority he had never once questioned. "When it's only us, protect them." The viral storm became a weather system of its own. People wrote, people judged. The comments read like tiny verdicts. Some called him a coward earlier in life for walking away. Some called him a hero in hindsight. Between those extremes, there was the hunger for an easy narrative and the cruelty of a crowd that loved spectacle more than truth. Neighbors recognized him in the street now with a new set of eyes. Some took photos, but most just watched. A reporter called. He declined. The police knocked once, civil and methodical, took statements, asked for his contact information. They were polite and professional. They did not arrest him. The timeline of responsibility was practical. He'd done what he'd done to stop a threat. But the court of public opinion did not operate on the same logic. It wanted a face it could mock or celebrate, a headline it could spin. At home, Emily slept with the light on and a small knot of hand-knitted yarn she had made in a school craft hour. Michael sat at the little kitchen table, the broken pen in one hand and an old photograph in the other. It was the two of them, Sarah smiling, baby Emily on her hip, a day of too bright sun. There was a calendar with dates circled for school events, bills were folded in a narrow stack. He had given up a life that had made room for danger, for the quieter danger of raising a child, and those choices were his, and he had always felt the cost of them in small, private ways. The mockery on social media aided him, not because he loved fame, but because it began to change the atmosphere of their life. The neighbor who'd once offered to watch Emily in a pinch now asked the question with a small, uncertain look, "Will you be okay?" The question had a dozen things lodged behind it: safety, scandal, trouble. Michael found himself answering by showing up the same way he always had. He drove Emily to school in the morning, came home to make the sandwiches, did the dishes, folded laundry with the slow, focused care of a man for whom domestic routine had become sacred. That day, at the metal-smelling edge of twilight, the SUV came. It drew up clean and quiet into the street, the sort of car that made the trash bins look like anachronisms. A woman stepped out with a purposeful gait. She was tall, poised, hair exact, rain droplets on her coat like careful punctuation. She rang his bell. Michael opened the door before the knock could settle. "You're Michael Ward," she said. Her voice had corporate polish, but it was neither cruel nor performative. It had a steadiness that suggested someone used to giving commands that had consequences. "Who's asking?" he said, the way men do at thresholds when courtesy and caution have to be balanced. "My name is Isabella Lane. I'm with Lane Industries." She held out a hand, an offer of business. Instead of taking it, he closed the door a fraction and looked at her as if the right answer required time to assemble. She didn't give him much. There was a small envelope in her hand, but he didn't see what was in it. She didn't step into his apartment uninvited. She had been raised or trained to keep a distance. "May I come in?" she said. "It's about the woman from the alley. Sophie is my sister." The muscles along his jaw moved. Lane, the surname, meant something in the city. They were the kind of family that built skylines and reputations. He had no desire to be folded into that world, and yet the question of Sophie, a human life, held in an alley, occupied the same moral space as an unpaid bill or a wordless promise. Michael decided. He ushered them to the small living room where Emily was coloring by the lamp. Sophie watched him with a kind, stunned gratitude that made his chest ache. When she stepped forward, she looked like one of the kind of people who had always expected someone else to fix things. She reached for Emily in a hug that said, simply, "Thank you." The girls held one another in that awkward, immediate way that strangers with a common debt sometimes do. It was the kind of scene that could have stayed private, but Isabella had other ideas. She watched Michael as if trying to find something. Her eyes settled on the pen on the coffee table. Michael had set it down during introductions. The eagle etched into its metal caught a sliver of light. Isabella's face changed in a way that was professional and sudden and personal all at once. She leaned forward across the coffee table, as if she recognized something familiar in a place where familiarity was least expected. "You carry this," she said. Her words were soft. "That eagle, that's not a common mark." Michael felt the weight of it. He had never advertised what the engraving meant. He had left that life quietly, the way people fold maps they no longer need. He had not told Emily about the unit or the missions. He had not wanted to give her a world that smelled of danger. But Isabella's eyes had the look of someone who recognized insignia the way other people recognized faces. "My wife gave it to me," he said simply. "She gave that to you?" Isabella echoed. The envelope she had brought lay unopened on the table. She reached for it and then withdrew, as if the motion of stepping into his life was a choice she needed to consider. "I need to ask you something. Did you serve with the Third Eagle?" The name might have been a relic for some. For Michael, it was a series of measured memories. The weight of an issued vest. The hush of a briefing room. The names of men he still thought of in the middle of the night. He allowed himself the smallest nod. The truth had always sat in him like a quiet stone. He didn't brag about it. He had walked away from that world when Emily was born, because he wanted a life they could color in without sharp edges. Isabella's expression shifted then. The corporate mask slipped for a moment to reveal something else. A private, raw gratitude. "My sister says a man saved her," she said. "She doesn't remember faces, but she remembers the eagle. She remembers a hand. She told us later, between sobs, that the man who came for her moved like someone trained to save people. We didn't know whom to thank." Michael shrugged, minimizing. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Isabella said. She sat back and folded her hands. "People are making things up online. They're mocking. I can make them stop." "You can't stop the internet," Michael said. "No." Her mouth pressed into a line. "But I can tell the truth." That was how the turning began. Isabella had the power to shape the narrative. She knew reporters. She knew how stories were packaged. She also knew Sophie's gratitude and what it does to a private person who chooses to act publicly out of debt. She called a press conference the next day with a clarity that was almost surgical. The stage was set, not for spectacle, but for correction. The conference was short and precise. Isabella spoke with a voice that threaded through the crowd of cameras. She told the story plainly. Her sister nearly attacked in an alley. A man intervened. The man carried a pen with an eagle engraving associated with a small unit that had saved a city before disappearing into its own shadow. She refused to let the narrative dissolve into mockery. She described Sophie's terror and the tangible gratitude that followed. She named Michael not as a curiosity, but as a man who had chosen family over fame, who had walked away from a world of operations to come home and fold clothes and teach a child to tie her shoes. The internet is reflexive, but not immutable. The angle she offered, from gratitude and context, from the sister who had been saved, steadied the discussion. The clip that had mocked him was overlaid with interviews and facts. Reporters asked intelligent, respectful questions. Lane Industries posted a statement praising the unnamed man's courage and calling for privacy and respect. A few commentators adjusted their tone. The trending thread that had been gears grinding down on one man began to unwind. Michael watched it all with a numb wonder. It felt strange to be the subject of someone else's vindication. He had rarely allowed himself to believe that stories could be reset. But Isabella did not just stop at public words. She showed up at the little apartment later that week with a contract and a proposal. "We can help," she said, sitting across from him in a chair that was too big for the cramped living room. "We need someone who understands protective operations. We have people who can't be trusted to guard the things they build. I want you to lead a team for us. It's a real job with real pay. It comes with benefits. It comes with security for your daughter." He listened, not because he wanted the job. He had long ago assumed he would never go back, but because the offer landed where choices always had, at the intersection of duty and family. He thought about nights of quiet and tight budgets. He thought about the way Emily hummed when she slept, how she slapped a mosquito with missionary zeal, how she had once drawn a picture of their family with 3 big hearts. This wasn't a chance at thrills. It was a way to stand again in a role he thought he had abandoned, without betraying the little life he'd built. He would not let fame define him. He would not become something for cameras. But he could use the offer to give Emily stability and to channel his competence into something that protected rather than exposed. There were no easy answers. He thought about Sarah and the promise to protect. He thought about the pen with its bent middle and blackened line where tape fought to hold 2 halves together. The eagle was worn but still visible. He picked it up, feeling the cool metal between fingers calloused from dishes and the small hand knots of parenting. He remembered Sarah's hands on his face the morning she died, her voice nothing but a soft command: "Keep them safe." "You don't have to decide right away," Isabella said, "but the offer is real. We want someone who will keep people safe, not for camera attention, but because people deserve it." "Why?" Michael asked. The word was small but true. "Why would a company like yours come find a man like me?" Isabella met his eyes. "Because sometimes the people who know how to protect aren't the ones who advertise. Because someone owes you this. Because my sister is alive because of you. Because gratitude matters." The public vindication allowed him room to breathe, but the private decision demanded a different sort of courage. He was tempted to say no simply to preserve the fragile anonymity that had kept Emily from being the subject of gawking. He was also tempted to accept, to let competence and duty knit into something practical for their life: steady pay, a schedule that would allow him to pick up Emily from school, a team to lead with clarity and purpose. Meanwhile, the city had its own appetite for stories. Social media changed its tune. Some of the same accounts that had mocked him now posted apologies with a cruelty of their own. The swing from ridicule to praise felt dizzying. People reshared the footage, but with a different filter. Commentary about bravery, about men who made sacrifices in private. Others complained that the internet was fickle. Michael found those debates exhausting. He wanted the noisy world to reduce to a quiet life. School lunches, soccer practice, a bedtime story that was read with enough emotion to make the cat nap on his lap. In the apartment, Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor with Emily, the 2 of them making friendship bracelets from the skeins of yarn Emily refused to throw away. It was a small, ordinary scene that felt dangerously like a miracle. Sophie's hands were gentle on the string, and Emily's laugh had a lightness Michael had not heard since Sarah's early mornings. "You're brave," Sophie told Emily. Emily considered that, and then said, with the logic of an 8-year-old, "He's not brave like a superhero. He's brave like you help someone up." This phrasing lodged with Michael. He had always feared the idea of returning to a public life, because heroism in the eyes of others often demanded spectacle and self-sacrifice that ruined families. He hadn't left to hide. He had left to choose a different kind of bravery, the daily, mundane, reliable kind. But he realized they could coexist. He could take a job that did not exploit his past, but used his skill to protect people without turning him into a headline. Isabella watched the girls from the doorway and then stepped inside to close it. She had a reputation for being unflinching in business, but she listened to the room as if it were music she had to learn to read. "We can set terms," she said. "You run a team. You choose who you bring on. We protect your time, we protect your privacy." She did not promise a seamless future. She did not promise an absence of scrutiny. She offered structure and resources, the kind of equipment and backup that made the work of protection less a solitary burden and more a coordinated effort. He thought of the pen. He took it out and turned it over in his hand. He had used it as a makeshift tool in the alley, not as a weapon, but as a steadying thing in his palm. That evening, as the city exhaled on the noise of its own gossip, he pressed the pen's fractured seam as if to test whether the two halves would ever be truly whole again. The eagle's engraving gleamed with tiny dignity. "You offered me something," he said to Isabella finally, "not because you wanted to make me famous, but because you thought I could still do a job. That means more than praise." "That's the point," she said. "You're a person, not a story." He agreed to think about it. That night, he let himself sleep in a way that was not always given to him. Eyes heavy but not haunted, the pen on the nightstand like a promise that was part memorial and part tool. The acceptance didn't come as a triumphant speech. It came as a quiet morning. He wrote out a schedule on a scrap of paper, negotiating with himself on hours he could be home, days off for Emily's recitals, and boundaries for publicity. Isabella acquiesced, drawing lines of confidentiality and trust. The company did not want a spectacle. They wanted reliability and skill. They wanted a man who valued family because the best protectors did not gamble with the lives they were paid to guard. When he signed the contract, his pen, the small broken one, sat beside the official pen on the desk. He used it to sign the final page, feeling the coolness of metal against page and skin. The eagle engraving gleamed with tiny dignity. Publicly, the story quieted. Some outlets ran profiles of him and wrote about the sacrifices of single fathers. Others ran think pieces about the dangers of snap judgments online. The headlines shifted from mocking to respectful. The city is a slow thing. It remembers and forgets by turns. For Michael, the biggest change was private. He had something that looked like a future, a job that honored what he could do, hours that allowed bedtime stories, and a company that had the muscle to push back against the more ruthless corners of social media. There was also the private task of explaining things to Emily. She asked the direct questions that children do. Will people laugh at you again? Will I have more friends? Can Sophie sleep over? He answered with the blunt honesty of a man who knows how seldom promises of certainty hold up in weather and wind. People will be weird sometimes, he said, but we will be okay. They rebuilt their routines. They found new rhythms that included training sessions in the morning that were also dad and daughter chores. He taught Emily how to tie a knot that could secure parcels or help in an emergency. She declared she wanted to be brave the way he was, but also to eat pancakes made without too much butter. Michael learned to accept help where he once would have refused. Isabella kept her distance, but made clear that when the job needed someone, she would be there to back him up. The pen moved from pocket to drawer to nightstand, until one night, months later, they sat on the living room floor with Sophie, making bracelets out of the same yarn. The girls chattered about school and kittens and how many stars they'd seen on the way to the store. Michael watched them and traced the pen's curve with the thumb of his free hand. He thought about the small things that made a life: A proper winter coat, the way a child's laugh filled an apartment too small to keep secrets. A boss who actually made life easier instead of making it performative. A friend who didn't ask for stories, but for time. At the doorway, Isabella stood with a coffee cup in hand. She had come by to check logistics. Instead, she found the simple picture of their lives. The girls ran over to her as if she were a kind of aunt they'd only recently discovered. Isabella smiled, the motion habitual but sincere. "You did what you had to do," she said to Michael, voice low, almost private. "You kept someone alive." "You told the press," he said, but it wasn't an accusation. It was acknowledgement. There was gratitude in his tone. "I told the truth," she said. That was what mattered. He took the pen out once more, turning it in his hands the way someone reads a page. He had carried it through years of late-night laundry and panic attacks that came and went like storms. It had been bent, mended, used. The eagle engraved was no bragging banner. It was a small promise that he had made to someone else and then extended to himself. He put the pen in his pocket again, but this time with a steadiness that suggested the two halves might be held together not by tape, but by a life rebuilt. Later, alone in the dark when Emily slept and the city had finally slipped into its quieter gear, Michael walked into the small kitchen and sat at the table. He opened a small tin where he kept Sarah's letters and a photograph or two. He read a scrap, fingers tracing an inked word that made his throat tight. Her handwriting was smudged with rain from a day they had once been young and not entirely frightened of the future. "Protect them," she had written once. He didn't know if she had meant the same things he now protected. He whispered it to the empty room and felt, for the first time in a while, that the words had answered themselves. His life was both smaller and larger than he had imagined. Smaller because it revolved around one child's breath and the small acts of keeping a home warm. Larger because by choosing to show up again, he was allowing his old skills to become a source of shelter rather than a theater. There were no parades. There were no trophies. There was a desk with a nameplate and a team that tuned well to the rhythm he set. There were nights he picked Emily up from a school performance, and nights he ran training drills at a corporate complex to ensure that people who had influence kept safe. He learned to balance the utility of his craft with the tenderness of being a father. Sometimes he failed. Sometimes the public fussed. But the things that mattered most, a child's sleep, a sister's gratitude, a promise honored, remained steady. One afternoon, months after the alley, someone on social media resurfaced the original clip with a new caption. "Remember when the world judged so fast? He's quiet now. Maybe we should be like that, less loud." It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. The comment thread under it had grown kinder. People shared stories about the quiet courage in their own lives. A neighbor who shoveled a driveway after a storm. A nurse who stayed past her shift. The small gestures multiplied in the ordinary way miracles sometimes do, not with thunder, but with the slow accumulation of things done. The final scene that night was not dramatic. It was a tableau of little things. Michael sat on the couch, Emily on one side, Sophie on the other. They were making bracelets, laughter threading the room in comfortable arcs. Isabella stood in the kitchen making coffee, and then sat down silently. The act of being present felt like a gift. Michael pulled the pen out once, turned it over in his hand, and pressed it gently into the soft palm of Emily's small hand. "For when you learn to write," he said. She giggled and immediately made a scandalous announcement that she would be a president who ate pizza every day. The girls laughed. The television hummed with a show about someone else's troubles. Their world was a warm island. Michael placed his hand over Emily's briefly, a small private blessing. The eagle glinted. In that moment, the pen was not a relic of a life he ran from, or a badge he needed to show the world. It was a symbol in miniature, broken and mended, marked by loss, carried to new places of repair. It reminded him that identity is not a line you cross only once. It is a thread you check every day. He had been a protector before Emily was born. He was a protector now. He had made choices to shed and to reclaim, and both acts were honors. Outside, rain came again, steady and soft. Inside, a family stitched new pieces into an ongoing life. There were promises still to keep, worries that would not vanish, and mornings that demanded patience. Yet the whisper that had started it all, "Dad, don't let me die," now lived as a promise shared rather than a threat feared. It had not been a command that turned him into a headline. It had been a child's trust that reminded him who he was. If you believe quiet courage matters, hit subscribe. Months later, when asked by a junior officer on his new team why he had taken the offer, Michael's answer was simple and unadorned. "Because I refuse to let the people I love be at risk," he said. "Because some things are worth leaving your comfort for." He paused and looked at the man across from him. Because a promise is a promise. The camera that filmed that interview never made him into a spectacle. It recorded a man with plain hands and the calm of a person who had done hard things and chosen home. The world could admire him or not. Either way, he had chosen a life that honored both skill and the tiny daily mercies of fatherhood. The pen returned to its place on the nightstand. Emily fell asleep holding a bracelet she had made, which Michael later found in her drawer like some small talisman of the ordinary and the brave. Sophie visited often. Isabella kept an email in her phone with his contact, but otherwise stayed out of the small tides of their evenings. The final picture is the easy one. 3 figures on a couch, bracelets slung across small wrists, a pen tucked into a pocket not as armor, but as an emblem. The eagle looked up from the metal like an old, patient guardian. Michael watched the girls chattering about future plans. Ridiculous, wild, essential. And he felt something inside him stitch up. Not a grand repair, but a usable seam. They were quiet heroes in the way families are. People who accept risk not for applause, but for the comfort of the other. The city would forget them. The internet would find another target. But the promise remained, held in small daily acts. Lunches made, curtains washed, photos taken, nights kept safe. Share this if it moved you. If you believe heroes live among us, not always on pedestals, but often in kitchens, holding pins and paper cuts, and promises, and keeping faith through small, steady decisions.